So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's John Johnson from NSF, and I'm going to welcome you to our 30-minute webinar that is going to help you really allocate your important resources better across your role and also the role of your team. But before I do that, I've got two things I always like to do. The first is to welcome everybody from the various countries that we've had delegates sign in from. So that would be a warm welcome to Dubai, Germany, Abu Dhabi, UK, France, Norway, Korea, Singapore, India, Cyprus, New Zealand, Austria, Netherlands, Philippines, Denmark, Brazil, Ireland, Italy, USA, Sweden and Switzerland. So warm welcome. The second thing I want you to do is just have a piece of paper or a pen in front of you and to record on it following this webinar the one thing that you'll do different on Monday as a result of this webinar. So I want you to think hard about what you would do differently when you've got the benefit of some of these key tips. For those of you that have been on these webinars before, of course you'll know NSF. We are a leading GMP consultancy in specialist training, auditing, and particularly in transformational projects, particularly, of course, in the pharmaceutical quality system arena. I'm sure most of you will know me or have worked with me previously. I'm a Vice President here at NSF Health Sciences, and I've held a number of interesting positions at corporate and senior roles in the industry since 1985. So what I'm going to cover in this webinar is, first of all, how does it feel out there to be in your shoes? How does it feel to be a senior pharmaceutical leader in this industry just now? And ultimately, how are you going to succeed in this environment? We're going to talk a little bit about how human behaviours are going to drive your success and how you can influence others to follow your best practices. We're also going to make some important links on resource management to ICHQ9, quality risk management, to communication strategies, and also to your goal in making sure that you've got long-term compliance to cGMP through active focusing and action-centered leadership. And I'm not just going to talk about these tips, I'm also going to show you how we've used them in a key case study that led to some significant improvements at a client facility. So out there at the moment, it feels like we're in a control center of a nuclear power station or on the flight deck of a major airline, because we're surrounded all the time by signals and signs and indicators and noise and klaxon and Twitter and emails and meeting notifications. How on earth do we choose what to work on at any one time? How do we use our finite amount of attention span and resources to best effect? Because we know that in the course of your working week, you're going to be faced with all sorts of questions shown on page 6. Questions about GMP deviations, whether you need to recall batches, questions around your trusted chief engineer and why they quit and how you'll cope once he's quit. I know that you're going to be talking day on day about whether batches are going to be released on time, whether you've got sufficient customer service, whether you've been able to make that particular product to a process that meets cGMP. And all of those questions, all of those challenges are breaking over you in waves every single minute of every hour of every day. So how do you stop yourself drowning? How do you make sure you allocate the right amount of time to the right things? Because it's absolutely true that you're going to be challenged to do more and more with less and less. You're going to be challenged to improve compliance, improve output, improve reliability, improve budgets, with fewer and fewer available resources, with less and less structure necessarily around you. But of course, the only way you can do that is if you've got a pharmaceutical quality system, policies, procedures that are robust and easily communicated and enforced. So you're not going to be able to do more with less unless those systems are very, very robust. So ultimately, the only way to succeed in any task in this century is really first and foremost to understand what that task is and own it. To make sure that there's a single point of accountability for each task, a subject matter expert who can own that particular issue, focus on it, give it the resources, prioritize it, and without distractions, nail that issue and make sure it's nailed for the long term. Because if you only do something half-heartedly, you know it's going to have to be reworked and redone again in the future. So we're going to be talking about, in this webinar, how to make your life just that little bit easier. And on slide 9, we have a nice tool here, a nice 3-stage process that we use during our GMP inspections, during our CAPA effectiveness checks, and also during our responses to regulatory inspections. Because ultimately, you need to know the answers to these questions in order to know whether a particular issue is a risk and whether it's being addressed properly. So first of all, is the process that you're looking at actually in place? Is it well defined? Is it written down? Is it prescriptive? Is it appropriate for what it's designed to do? And does it fit with you and your organization and your products? Assuming that that process is in place in terms of procedures, policies, or facilities, is it then actually being used? Are people following it? Is it being followed in full? Are people following it with flawless execution? Is it properly understood? And can staff easily articulate it to a third party? And then, of course, you want to know, assuming that it is in place and is in use, is it actually giving you what you want? Is it providing you with a statement of control? And ultimately, can it be improved for the future? So once you know whether something is in place, in use, and in control, it's then relatively easy to use the ICHQ9 tools in terms of severity, occurrence, and detectability to then look at how to improve the process for the long term. We've said many times, both Martin Lush and I in our webinars, that the key X factor that you need in order to improve your processes or improve your compliance on site is the right human behaviours, the right staff behaviours, the right approach. And that approach really needs the right motivation, ability, effective triggers, and good habits. And fundamentally, the key message here is that if you combine motivation, ability, triggers, and habits, you will naturally define the right process, and always the right process will give you the desired outcomes. If you're weak on any of those 4, you won't get the right process, and you really won't get what you set out to achieve. The key one here for everybody, I think, is giving people the motivation. Give people a reason for caring. Give people a reason for engaging, striving, sweating to actually get the thing done. Because if people don't understand and know why should they work hard to fulfill it? But we've talked about this a few times. So when you think about the power of less, the first message here is that ultimately you have a finite number of hours in the day, a finite number of hours in the week, and a finite head count around you. So you can't be expected to boil the ocean. You're going to have to make some selections and some priorities. The key tool for that, and I don't apologize for this because I think it's such a critical guidance to us, is a great knowledge of ICHQ9. Utilizing ICHQ9 to help you determine priorities and act on the high-risk items is critical. Of course, all of us want to have perpetual GMP compliance, and we know that an effective PQS, an effective pharmaceutical quality system, a clear vision, a clear definition of where you want to go and how you want to do it, a way of communicating that vision, mission, and values is absolutely critical, and that comes from the top. We also know, when you look at the 6-fingered hand on the right there, that a real knowledge of the job, an absolutely passionate engagement with the prevention of human error, a detailed knowledge and expertise of the analysis tools for root cause, implementation of ICHQ9, understanding of the job through walking the job and getting to the real place and doing the Gemba is absolutely critical. And combining that with the right behaviours will allow you to use your available resources to best effect. So what is active focusing? Well, fundamentally, if you try and tackle everything that grabs your attention, you're going to be constantly overwhelmed, stressed and burnt out. And when you feel burnt out, you lose focus, you lose energy, and you really don't achieve what you really need to achieve. So it's really important that you are clear on what is an absolutely essential part of your role, and you focus on it. And you ignore the non-essentials. And you make sure that you focus on the right thing for the right reasons, and you share those reasons with other people so that they care about them as well, so that they can help you in your journey to improve. And of course, it always helps if you make it more inclusive and lively and attractive, and give people very clear feedback on how you're making progress. But of course, moving on to slide 13, time is never our friend. And we're going to go through some key tips here on how to make sure that you can do more with less. So at 1 o'clock, it's really important to allow the team to input into your life and your task list and your objectives. You don't want to act as an island here. You don't want to be isolated. You want people to be helping you, but people can't help unless they really understand the reasons why they should give you any attention and should apply themselves to the task in hand. Of course, if people don't understand or know the reason for doing a task, why would they strive to do it on time, in full, every time? It just wouldn't happen. 2 o'clock, of course, you should make sure that you use ICHQ9. It's critical guidance. It enables you to really measure severity, occurrence, and detectability, and look at a risk probability number, which then gives you a very clear risk register on the running order of jobs that need to be fixed or resolved or issues improved. At 3 o'clock, it's obviously critical to simplify that list. You can't do everything on the list, you can't do everything in parallel, and you'll probably not have enough time in your career to do everything in series either. So you've got to be able to simplify that list and eliminate the non-essentials. So what I've shown you on slide 16 is a nice grid that you could use to set a rank order of jobs that allows you to prioritize your time. So across the x-axis, we show low complexity jobs through to high complexity jobs. On the left axis, you show low value to high value jobs. And using your individual risks on post-it stickers or on a scoring system, you can then say which of these 4 grids are appropriate for each of those tasks. So of course, if you have a high value task that's going to give you a real return on investment and it is low complexity, these have to be your star projects. These are the things that you must do as a high priority as quickly as possible and give overwhelming force to fixing those issues. Conversely, if you look at the bottom right and you consider the low value jobs, which are complex, difficult to do, require a multidisciplinary team, for example, or a lot of capex, of course, if they have low value and they're complex, these are jobs that you'll get onto over the horizon sometime never, because they're not your priorities. If you look at the top right quadrant, you have high value jobs but are tough to fix, and these need more understanding, more research, more subject matter expert time to try and simplify them or look to see whether they're worth doing. They could be very high value and worth doing, but they need to be simplified. And of course then on the bottom left, where they're low value and low complexity, these are the jobs that I like to call sandwich jobs, the ones that you just fit in, squeeze in wherever you can, because they're simple, they just do it now jobs. They're low value, but they do it now, but they should never distract you from the top left. At 4 o'clock, we certainly recommend that you generate some sort of skill set and some sort of process to enable rapid decision making. You want to be able to define the roles of every person involved in a decision, a key decision. You want to avoid the power of veto and committee decisions. You want to avoid politics and utilize objectivity, data, and scientific knowledge in everything that you do. And what I've shown in slide 18 is a simple, rapid decision-making tool that really helps you define who should recommend, who needs to agree, who needs to perform the job, and who needs to provide input to the overall process. So of course in a group of, let's say, 10 managers, 10 qualified persons, 10 production and QA people, not everybody is going to input into every decision. Not everybody has to agree with every decision. Not everybody can have the power of veto. So by actually defining who provides input, who is the single recommender, who are the single subset of people who have to agree to the decision, it then makes that decision making much, much quicker, and you start to have action-centered leadership, because that leads to you performing new actions and new tasks far, far quicker. Of course, when you move to 5 o'clock, it's clear that there is a law here, a law that I think is actually global. It's actually called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law says that work will always expand to the time allotted. And that means that if you have an open-ended task, you know it will never get done. If there isn't a deadline, you know that that task is going to drift. You're going to rework it, revisit it. You're going to involve too many people in it. And it doesn't have that sharp deadline. And of course, that then leads to frustration, project drift, and sometimes uncontrolled change as well. So we really like to use that well-established 5-letter acronym SMART in all of our projects. We want it to be S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-orientated. Because ultimately, we want you to have a fixed endpoint that's going to help you finish that job on time without it dragging. At 6 o'clock, I really love this one because multitasking is a myth. Every time you change your attention from one job to another, your mind has to go through a degree of reworking. It has to go through refocusing. It's a distraction. It utilizes some of your brain power and time as you continually chop and change between jobs. And I always think to myself that if you can do one job well in full with no need to rework it, no need to revisit it, no need to reprocess that particular job, that has to be far more effective than doing 2 jobs half-hearted that often require revisiting. And this is really useful for you because, you know, when you think about, let's say, visual inspection of a finished product or an aseptic connection or execution of a particularly difficult analytical method, it really implores you to look at ways of removing distractions for those operators and team members so that they can do that visual inspection, that aseptic connection, or that analytical method with total concentration, with flawless execution, with as few distractions around them as possible, whether they're environmental, task-based, or workplace-based. Because ultimately, when we focus on one job at a time, we get the job done properly. Moving on to 7 o'clock, it's absolutely clear that whenever organizations utilize a multidisciplinary team that's focused, that understands the issues, that buys into the concern, they actually develop overwhelming force. And you need overwhelming force to achieve anything. So if any of you follow sport, and let's say, for example, football, you'll realise that the most successful football teams will overwhelm their opposition. They'll use overwhelming force. So if you watch Real Madrid or Barcelona or Millwall, you'll see that they use all of the resources available, the defence, the midfield, the strikers, the crowd, all working together in unison to overcome whatever opposition is in front of them. They think of the task as a rock in the road, and they think about what do they need to deploy in order to roll that rock out of the road. Of course, you need tools, you need headcount, you need some thought, you need some method, you need a way of making sure it happens safely. But ultimately, you need the combined power of your multidisciplinary team to plan, to do the method, and to make sure you achieve what you need to achieve. But actually, there is another tip here, and that is not to spread yourself too thinly. Make sure that you've got a limited number of goals, ideally no more than 3, and ideally you work on one goal without distraction, utilizing the overwhelming force of your team to achieve what you want to achieve. This next one at 8 o'clock is one that I've probably only used myself over the last, I would say, 6 months or so. And it's actually made me feel much better about my own performance, because now I make sure that the most important tasks are done first every day. This prevents me from procrastination. It prevents me from putting off jobs that I don't really like to do. And it actually gives me a buzz, because if I complete the most important task by lunchtime or mid-afternoon, I feel as if the rest of the working day is a bonus for me to actually work on the less important jobs, or the lower priorities, or the things that I like to do, or the things that are more creative. So make sure when you're high energy in the morning, first thing, you work on your most important task first. It'll make you feel much, much better. At 9 o'clock, we have an interesting segue to a message that we share many times at NSF, and that is to make sure that your pharmaceutical quality system is steeped in education, that is actually focused on making sure people around you have the skills, expertise and experience to do the job well. Making sure you educate and develop people around you is not just good for them, it actually makes delegation much easier as well. So that when you're in trouble, when you're busy, when you're at the sharp end of a project, you naturally have people around you who understand, who can be delegated to, and that the wider communities can come to your rescue and support you in a key project. Moving on to 10 o'clock, it's absolutely clear to me that willpower is the single thing that causes habits to get formed. But willpower is in really, really short supply, isn't it? You can only really apply willpower to one habit at a time. So choose that habit well, utilize the willpower, and then move on to the next habit. Don't try and change everything at the same time. On to 11 o'clock. Well, fundamentally, we all of us, in all of our walks of life, have to learn to respectfully say no. No is a very, very powerful word. Much more powerful than yes. Because when you say yes, and you keep saying yes as a default, people understand that that could well lead to frustration and disappointment because you're over-promising and under-delivering. Because yes can sometimes mean yes, but it can mean maybe. And it can mean yes for now, or it may be, yes, I acknowledge it for now, but I'm not sure I can do anything about it. So simplify your communication and be clear to people on what you can commit to, on what you definitely cannot commit to. And then fundamentally at the top of the shop at midnight, why not look at how you can actually use your time better? Utilize your time to plan, assess progress, think properly and widely, adjust your trajectory as needed, and use that time to make sure that you can execute the job right first time every time. That might look like you're slowing down because you're using some planning time, but actually all our research shows that the end-to-end lead time for doing a task is always improved when you slow down and take some planning time. So how has this actually manifested itself in a project? Well, I have a case study here for you, very interesting case study, where actually the very first step, as is very common in any project, is to fully understand what the problem is. So be objective, not subjective. Understand the data. Understand what the head is telling you. Understand what the guts are telling you. Understand what the heart is telling you. Try to get a full understanding of what the problem is. Use some scientific, very specific language that defines the problem. And when we did this with our client, it turned out that actually the problem was that their quality system was dysfunctional, it was complex, people don't follow it, people don't understand it, they're struggling to cope, and their real issue was that they needed to pass a very important GMP inspection in 6 months. And if they were going to try and change the whole quality system, they didn't have the resources to do it. They felt like they were boiling the ocean. So their current state was that the pharmaceutical quality system was hard to follow, it was low performance, and there were significant GMP issues. And they wanted to get to a state where it was simple, easy to measure, with self-directed teams, ultimately with perpetual compliance. That's where they wanted to go. So we defined 6 systems that would be really important to improve. And of course, the firm had already understood that it needed better policies, procedures, it had some mandatory attributes that were needed, and it had a lot of detail and further detail that it needed in those upgraded procedures. And they wanted to embark on this in a series, utilizing the detail of each and every system. The problem with that is they just didn't have the time to fix all of those issues and communicate those simplifications as quickly as possible. They were in effect using the country road rather than the motorway. So what did they do? They planned to go through each system in turn, working and reworking each of the details in each of the procedures, painstakingly going through each of the 6 systems, and we identified that those improvements were going to be complex, difficult to communicate, and in fact they were already losing momentum by the time they got to the change control project, and people were beginning to lose focus and lose attention, to a point at which we knew they were just not going to be ready in time. So we helped them work on what we called the 5 to survive. So we helped them define the 5 mandatory requirements of each of these systems that will enable them to set effective standards for each of these systems that were simple to communicate, simple to enforce, easy to measure, and easy to verify. Here's an example of the 5 to survive for the deviation management system. And we said to them, you need posters, you need front page SOP boxes, you need a GMP passport almost that says every time you do a deviation occurs, it is absolutely mandatory, completely, required every single time, that there is immediate engagement with that deviation from the subject matter experts within 6-hour shift, each and every time, no excuses. Secondly, we said that those subject matter experts should go to the real place. They should do the Gemba. They should get first-hand knowledge of where that problem occurred. No more resolution of deviations from behind a laptop or on a telephone call. This was about face-to-face, real place communications. We said that rule number 3 would be that you would do a triaging, a risk assessment, using a documented risk assessment tool, so that you understand very quickly whether the issue is a patient safety issue, a product quality issue, a GMP compliance issue, or a quality technical agreement or CMC issue. Very important to understand exactly the consequences of doing nothing, and understanding why this particular issue should be allocated resources and what level of resource. Of course, the fourth rule was all about using the Klein process, the open, blame-free process of understanding potential root causes. So this is underpinned by an open, blame-free culture, by sensitive, open communications, by effective leadership and behaviours when trying to understand where the problem has occurred and how to resolve it. And ultimately, in every step of the process, those key insights should be documented in real time using structured worksheets. And we were able to define what is in effect a fairly complex process in just 5 simple rules. And that really meant that we could simplify communication, engage people better, make the PQS self-sustaining, and ultimately this led to a much more successful GMP inspection when, in effect, if they'd taken the country road approach, all hope looked like it was lost. So what I'm going to ask you to do next, as I mentioned before, is I'm going to ask you to take an hour to assess your priorities at work, in your workplace, or maybe in your home life, and really assess for yourself, what are your priorities? How do you communicate those priorities to other people? How do you engage people in those priorities? How do you allocate the time? And how are you going to accomplish the critical few in a short space of time using overwhelming force? I'm going to ask you to think about how you declutter your workspace, your work life, your home life, so that you can really focus on the most important things to you, whether that's health, family, friends, performance at work, projects at work, your career. Whatever is most important to you, how do you focus on those critical few items? Of course, I'll ask you as well to double-click on our webinars that we've had before and our videos. Particularly, I would say the video shown there that showed how we simplified batch manufacturing records and procedures to fantastic effect at a client facility, how we installed risk-based decision-making, and how we looked at how to reduce repeat deviations and human error in the workplace. But the key thing here as well is I want you to write down that single thing that you're going to do differently from Monday that's going to make a difference to your workplace. Of course, I'll invite you to our future webinars, starting with our next one in September the 18th, which is hosted by Martin Lush, and he's going to help you get the most from your training programs, making some of your key messages really stick for the long term. And I hope you enjoy the remainder of our webinars. Of course, you know where we are, you know what we do, and I'm easily contactable either via the website or via email. I hope this has worked okay for you. I hope you've had some insight from this, and we'll make this recording available on our website so that you can watch it and of course share it with your team as well. Thanks very much for listening. Thank you for your patience and your interest, and have a very happy Friday. Thanks very much.